wanted to do, and I don't care how it comes, but I just want, as I said before, some guidance for us as a DRA in terms of those, and let's try and cap it at 4 or 5 points. Things that we've heard a lot today. It's been a long day, and we've heard, we know what the recommendations are already from the Reserve Strategic Review. They've been well dissected and explained by General Laidlaw in terms of both their timelines and some of the nuances to some of those things. But we've also heard, some very direct analysis from Mark and from other presenters about some of the things that we need to get after as a matter of urgency in terms of optimising the capability of the reserve component. So distilling all that into 4 or 5 areas, and I'll just give you one example. It jumps out to me, anyway, that really making headway in terms of understanding the human capital that we've got in the reserve component, workforce intelligence. That is something which we have often talked about, never realised. And we know that we've got so much depth of human talent and the skills and qualifications that will never be grown in the permanent force present in the reserve. And having that to hand in a usable way, you can hang so many other arguments off that for resources, for structure, for enablers. So my point is, if it was me asking myself the question, what's the first thing I put up there on the whiteboard? It would be that. Let's create, in as fast a time as we can, using the resources that we've got, and it's in the reserve strategic review. But we need to understand our workforce in terms of our, the intelligence that we can bring to bear in terms of how to deploy the workforce in an optimal way. And that'll also help us, of course, in terms of making those from time to time tough decisions about whether, in the eventuality of call for or call out, which part of the nation's security apparatus is that person of most use, serving in their purely reserve capacity, or should they stay right where they are? So I'm happy to just do this now in a plenary session, make sure Josh is capturing things as I say. Josh, that's 1. Josh, that's 2. And let's just do it like that.
Yeah, David Horton. I'm S5 at Headquarters 5th Brigade. We've done a lot of these things of civilian skills before, but they're all focused around, I have a Cert 2 in hospitality, or I've got a forklift driver licence. I think that's really irrelevant. I'm not sure that someone who's a plumber in civilian life wants to come into military and do his same job in civilian for half the price. So I'm not sure. I think what we need to do is capture more than that. And really what you almost need to do is get a bio, run it through AI, and be able to go and say, oh, this guy's done planning at such and such, or this guy's done operations in this area. So I think our past attempts have been a little bit too, because of the technology we've had at the time, focused on that. The other thing is the agility of a shallow and broad workforce, which is the reserves, as opposed to a deep and narrow workforce, which is the more permanent force, provides more agility and potentially faster ability to learn and things like that. And that's the part, I think, with those civilian skills that we often miss with these skills databases.
Yeah, we've been very formulaic in some of our past attempts. As you say, just capturing technical trades, qualification skills, rather than that, that broader, more holistic perspective from what an individual can bring to the force. Paul.
The British used a system called manpower. It's not the manpower we had in Australia. And I recall seeing a demonstration of this many years ago, over 25 years ago. And they had a really great system in as much as they wanted to send some truck drivers over to a foreign country in Europe, and they wanted to know truck drivers who spoke French or Croatian or Serbian or whatever. Their manpower system could tell them which reservists had those mix of qualifications, language skills and other skills. It's hard to say. We're probably not exposed to the language so much, but it's been very important in some of the operations we've been to in the last 20 years, the language skills and other skills. And I think the more information we've got about our human capital in the reserve, the better it is. After Timor, when we didn't know how many tradespeople we had in the reserve when they were asking for tradespeople to go across to Timor and rebuild it, because we didn't have that database.
I put it to you, it didn't necessarily matter at the time because reservists at that time, back in 2000, well, the early 2000s, were keen to get a deployment. You'll recall that the Army was heavily committed across the Middle East, into East Timor, and in 2nd Division at the time when I was there, we were getting requests. They were going out across the Army. We're getting requests for tradespeople, and there was no shortage of individuals who were riflemen in whatever battalion or brigade it might be, who were qualified as carpenters, electricians, bricklayers, whatever. They'd stick up their hands, we'd take their data, gather the information, and they were keen to be deployed in whatever situation or whatever opportunity was presented to them. So they might be an infantryman, or they may have been artillery or armour, but here was an opportunity to deploy using their civilian trade, and we deployed a lot of individual roundouts and reinforcements in their civilian trade capacity. So whilst we didn't have it necessarily to hand, it was pretty easy to get that information and to get people who were keen to deploy.
I know we could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon about just this one topic. And Pete, I know you've got your hand up too. I'll come to you in a moment. I mean, I think we've got tools now through AI, through other mechanisms to ensure that at the point of entry, it's not beyond the wit of man to devise a system whereby a reservist in their own words can describe how they can be of best effect and best use to national defence. You know, what are the things that I bring to the fight? Apart from my formal qualifications that I may gain during my military service. And we have the ability these days to capture that in quick time at the point of entry as someone comes into the system. And that's what we should be doing. And that enables the person not just to express the formal qualifications that they've got, but also their own general aptitudes, interests, capacity. And that's vital, that we can match individuals to particular tasks that we've got, be it in a form body or be it as an individual when that arises.
Thanks, sir. So Captain Eric Wong, currently posted at Fire Brigade Headquarters, but in my civilian job, I work for the Treasury in the National Security Team, and on a daily basis, I review cabinet submissions from Defence pertaining to personnel, policy, capability from every corner of Defence. And I frustratingly observe that there's a bit of an advocacy problem, I think, in that Serco 5 members are simply not in the room. Serco 5 members aren't holding the pen. The pen's being held by APS, by Serco 7, who often are quite unaware of the value that Serco 5 members can provide. And I think there's a role for the Defence Reserve Association to ensure that the highest levels, capability managers, are aware of the proposition of Serco 5, and also consider the opportunities that we can offer from sort of a cost perspective, and also from diversity, social license, you know, all that good stuff as well. I want to raise as well a particularly grating experience I had in a meeting just 2 weeks ago, where someone said that the Army has too many Bushmasters and we shouldn't get any more. And coming from a battalion where, you know, we had no organic lift at all, it was quite, you know, apparent that was a key example of just how, I guess, disconnected some parts of the defence organisation can be from the average reserve experience. Thanks.
Yeah, I think this goes directly back to one of my earliest comments today around how there is a cultural blind spot where certain things are contemplated, dissected and discussed in Canberra. They're as you rightly say, not a reserved voice in the room, nor one that really has a lateral attitude towards how to get after something other than within the confines of the experience of CIRCAT 7 and the bureaucratic responses that everyone's reflex action is in Canberra. So we do need to find a way, a pathway, and that's not to say that there aren't mechanisms within general aid laws area and through general BERS attendance at CASAC. Of course, from time to time there are strong and well-informed reserve perspectives brought to bear, but you couldn't argue that that's the case across the enterprise. It's not. And so how we get to that point where it is always, if not front of mind, at least considered in terms of some of these big decisions, is there is still a gap there. Yeah. Pete.
So, just on workforce intelligence.
Yes, that's where we're at still right now. Yep.
There is a number of challenges that we do have there. One is mandating requirements for people to supply information. The other one is the three services capture things in different ways, which makes it very difficult for monitoring. We have a whole series of other dashboards that we are in pre-development stage that we're not getting a lot of traction for because they're not important, because they do more with the reserve force than the permanent force, which gives us a lot of airplay. So that is the significant challenge, and I'll certainly speak to General Laidlaw, who we Campbell about that, so we can get a little bit more, I suppose, bandwidth in that area. The EVP, which was spoken about, it's a three-way piece as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Modernising conditions of service, improving career management and opportunities, and simplifying administration. Anybody who's played in the reserve administration part, it is horrible. We try to take a permanent force system and make it...
Capture that, Josh.
And the only other thing that the gentleman gave me that out is being ex-CIRCAT 7 officer for 39 years.
Yep.
I found when I joined the reserve, suddenly I wasn't as important as the other people. And I see this even in my workplace now, where my one-star lovely person will go to the CIRCAT 706s, who their combined seniority is about 1/10 of my total seniority rank. Then they'll come back to me and ask advice. The normal thing is to go to a CIRCAT 7 person.
It's a reflex action. And how people unlearn that in a cultural sense, I don't know. But it is a real and apparent thing, and you hear it mentioned far too often for it just to be a figment of some individual's imagination. It does exist, and it's something that I think holds us back in terms of getting the full effect. So, yeah. So yes, yeah. So EVP and those dimensions to that. Thank you. That's point 2. Yep. Yep.
I think, while I think workforce intelligence is an interesting problem, I actually see it as a problem for Doug and the people inside the system to be solving rather than us. 2 points I want to make. The first is we've talked about social licence many times today. This is a key area that I think the DRA needs to be involved in. We need to be a voice in building social licence on behalf and being an advocate for our members and all of the current members of the ADF. And we need to do that more emphatically through a more comprehensive communications, social media strategy. I think there are great opportunities, but we need to be leading it. We can't be waiting for others to do it because nobody else is speaking in that space on behalf of us. I think there's an opportunity too that we're not looking at, and it's come out through this concept through where they're looking in the ESO space that there's going to be a main body. What's lacking in that space, in my view, is that we've got many ESOs, but we don't have a stratosphere of sort of the big to the bottom. We have 60 units or more in the 2nd Division alone. most of those have some form of association. And there is no body that actually looks over those or provides a voice for them. So an opportunity for this organisation is to try and harness and engage with those associations to try and build that voice. The other point I'm going to make is that listening to some of the things that Doug has said is many of the things that we are looking for them to solve are going to be predicated on, hey, what do we give up? We can only do this, implement these new things, add these new numbers if we give something up. And I think that's while I understand that paradigm inside defence at the moment, the only way we will address that effectively is to push government to increase the level of spend, because this should not be an either, giving up something in order for the Australian Defence Force to generate the capabilities that we're going to need. And my concern is that there are many people saying that by 2027, an adversary could well be ready to launch an offensive in an area to the north of us. And these plans that we're talking about will not materialise before 2030. So that's my second point. We need to be advocating strongly, not for one particular party or another, but we need to be advocating strongly that there needs to be an increase in defence spending.
Okay, so from that, point 3, a strong joined-up narrative led, perhaps, by the Defence Reserves Association, harnessing the collective voice and resources, because we don't have any resources. Other regimental associations are richer than us in many respects. But if we can coordinate that voice in advocating for the things that you've mentioned, Rob, then that's an area that and as I say, this is guidance to us as a DRA. So, we should begin to craft that. And I think we've got plenty of talking points already. And I enunciated some of those first thing this morning. Yeah.
Ken Broadhead, OUSI. There are plenty of CERCATs to accommodate the various types of service in all units. And I wonder whether the term Australian Army Reserve or other reserves has had its day. Apart from being possibly confused with operational reserves, I think there's an underlying hostility in defence to the nature of reserves, and you've seen it appear maybe in 1960 and when national service ended and when Afghanistan ended, and the sort of thing that Mark Armstrong said reinforces that view. So there is a role for an association of people who have certain CERCATs, otherwise known as reserves, but the whole notion of the Australian Army Reserve, I think, should be reconsidered.
Yeah, we've been around this boy many times, and I know that at our 2023 conference, for example, the then CDF, I think, was nudging us not so gently in the direction of describing the ADF as having a full-time and a part-time component. Having said that, the reserve has a degree of resonance and identity that is within the community. Now, if we talk simply about being part of the part-time component of the ADF, then that might aid understanding in some quarters, but equally it could have a detrimental effect in others. My personal view is the reserve has resonance, it has profile, and I'm talking to someone who spent most of his career in the regular army. But I think the reserve is, with the right narrative, apropos to your point, with a powerful message, people respect those who serve as well as do their civilian job. There is a power to the notion of the citizen soldier. Twice the citizen, Sir Winston Churchill once said. And I think the respect for that in the broader community is yet to be fully tapped and harnessed. I mean, on my drive up here, I stopped overnight in Albury, and I was struck by, in the morning when I laboured up that hill for my morning constitutional and got to that splendid monument on top of the hill overlooking Albury, that's dedicated to the citizen soldiers of 2 world wars. And also now added to that is an array of plaques and plinths around that monument that talks about, amongst other people, all those national servicemen that I mentioned a couple of times today, and all those who've served in various reserve deployments. I think communities, especially in regional and rural Australia, where after all we still draw most of our enlistments from, they recognise the reserve and what it does. And they also recognise and respect the historical antecedents to that reserve component. And I think we depart from that at our peril. That's just my view.
Can I just add to that? Someone like Israel, which has a total workforce model, still say we're going to mobilise the reserves. So I'm totally in agreement. What do we call ourselves if we're not reservists? We not only need to consider ourselves. You tell that to my employer, because they will say, "Who do you work for?" So I have 2 employers. Only one of them really pays my mortgage. So we need to be really careful about what we call ourselves. Reserves may not be the ideal solution, but if we have one, my employer's going to say, who are you really working for?
And I think maybe you've picked up a theme during the day. I've continually talked about the full-time or the permanent component of the ADF and the reserve component. I mean, we're all in the ADF, granted. But our challenge is to make sure that when people in Canberra talk about the ADF, they're not just talking about the permanent component of the ADF. That they are also considering, at least some of the time, the capacity and the needs and concerns of the reserve component. Yeah. So sorry, where are we at now? So we've got, is that 3 things we've got? I think. 3. Okay, good. We've got 2 to go. Who's next?
Yeah, sir, I've got the mic. Colonel Adam Strickland again. I'm at risk of talking too much, so this will be my last comment. What comes to mind is the area of most impact. Right, so if we link this to the Defence Strategic Review, the NDS, following then the Strategic Review of the Reserves, and then your role and the role of the Defence Reserve Association, where is the area of most impact? So if we all agree, we've mentioned it several times, we're all constrained physically in terms of fundamental inputs into capability. So not much is going to change. So where is the area of most impact? I think the area of most impact is engagement with CERCAT 3 and CERCAT 2. Right, because that's where additional capacity actually exists and comes with very little FIC overhead in order to access that capacity. So I'd put that to you, sir, that in terms of advocating where the department goes and where it puts its effort, that is one of the areas of most impact that you could probably influence.
Yeah, okay. And I think that certainly is aligned with doing those things through a couple of things we've already identified as lines of effort.
Brendan Casey, it's been a great day, so but I'm sure we're all looking forward to the drinks at the end of it. So I'll keep this fairly short. It's come up many times on the screen there. I know you obviously can't see it, Michael, because it's coming in the back there behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And it potentially could be rolled into an EVP, but as we turn to it, in terms of maximum impact, you have to focus on there's hundreds of issues and focus on the big ones. And as Rob said, the one I'm going to raise is more for General Laidlaw, and I know he is working on it, but I think DRA could provide support. It's just the really obvious one of actually getting an equivalent pay for reserves. So getting the full-time pay, adding the super, adding the medical, adding the dental, adding the rental allowance, all the other allowances, dividing by 212 or 225 or whatever you want to do, including tax, which isn't a problem because all the calcs you see are between 50% and 268, I think was in that advert we had put up, but that was including overtime for weekends and evenings, which probably is something you'd leave aside. But still, it's a massive number just to get a reasonable pay. I mean, that's going to make such huge differences to particularly if you want to retain full-timers. I remember seeing an article in it was a Cove about a full-timer who wanted to go to 3 days a week so he could look after his young kids or whatever. It was some sergeant in Armoured Corps or something. And he had a look at it and went from 5 days to 3 days. His pay got reduced to 30% of what it was before. So he was working 60% of the days and he was getting 30% of the pay. So he got another job. And there's a highly qualified thing that person we want to keep in the reserve. So to me, that's a really big, meaty issue. And I know it's not trivial because it's not budget neutral, obviously. But it's just such a massive issue. And it's so so logically consistent and so easy to argue and defend. I think we need somebody with the guts and everything to just actually push that forward, particularly somebody who hasn't got a lot of career perspectives ahead of them. General Laidlaw.
So what I'm hearing there is a fundamental inhibitor to optimising the potential capacity of the reserve component, be that ab initio reservists or people moving from CERCAT 7 to the reserve, is the fundamental inequities that are yet to be addressed around pay scales, around super, all those things that we have all talked about for a long time. None of that, it's all still just sitting there on the table. And we need to get after that. And with a 1% slice of the defence budget overall, there'd be more than enough money to resolve those inequities. Yeah, okay. I'll go Peter Alchemade and then down to Joe. Oh, sorry, Joe's got the mic. Peter, next.
It's got to be Navy's turn.
Yes, of course. Senior service, I get it, yeah.
Mike, totally agree with trying to manage and make inquiries, engage with CERCAT 2. We've been advocating that for years within the Navy context. But the one that I think you've got to get on the board is the big breakthrough with ab initio recruiting into Air Force and Navy, which has come out of the review and submissions into the review. I'll choose my word carefully, it's disappointing that there isn't money just to get it going and get it done in the next 12 months. And there'll have to be careful sliding around things in Canberra to advance those 100 positions. But I think we really need, as a DRA, we need to keep advocating for ab initio recruiting into the RAF and the Navy.
Yes, and I think we've been consistent as an association right from the very first draft of our submission to the Reserve Strategic Review on saying that we need to, and we were obviously very pleased to see that reflected in one of the final recommendations of the review, that we do need to get after a reserve component, an ab initio reserve component again, and I quoted that section out of that most recent article that went into the ASPE journal. Of course, it's dependent upon Navy and Air Force identifying exactly what it is they want that nascent ab initio reserve component to do. I think the other measures that are being taken at the moment in terms of an accelerated entry pathway, a service agnostic accelerated pathway, that will help to enable the creation of that. But we need to be more ambitious about that. I get that. Yeah. Peter? You got that, Josh? Ab initio, continue to pursue the accelerated. Yeah, I know. He's got the mic. Yeah,
I think one of the problems that we're trying to deal with is the fact that the ADF is still operating on a societal model that really doesn't exist in the community anymore. The general feeling among relatively new professionals is that they'll spend somewhere between 2 and 5 years with one employer in one role, or perhaps a series of roles, but allied roles, and then they'll look for opportunities to move into a new field or a expansion of the field that they're already working in with another employer to gain broader experience to become more employable. The difficulty with defence is that in general, at the moment, the only skills that are valued are the ones that have been exhibited in defence by and valued by senior defence players. So necessarily the value of a 20-year career defence member will be higher than a lateral employee who comes in at some level, spends 2 or 3 or 5 years in defence and then moves off having gained experience and gained value and then takes that to another employer or perhaps sets up their own business as it might be. One of the concerns I have at the moment is that the use of reserves is rapidly reaching a point where the average reservist is having great difficulty in actually having a valuable civil career. I don't have any evidence to back that up, just a series of conversations I've had over the weekend. But I think that so long as we are looking at how to increase the value of individual reservists, we're limiting the number of people in the community with skills that Defence will need in the foreseeable future to even consider a short-term engagement within Defence and to have channels that they could follow to get there. Now, I could use the cyber environment as an example, but we've had enough on that, I think, this weekend. But my big concern is that we have to seriously consider what does society itself want to devote to a reserve. The lesson that comes out of the Israeli situation is that Israel's defence strategy is heavily constrained by the fact that if it mobilises its reserve, as it's about to do, it can only do that for a very limited period of time before the economy of the country starts to collapse. I'll just leave it at that.
So, is there a recommendation there, something to pursue, Peter?
I think part of what we need to do is to start to articulate to the community, and it's been mentioned already, start to communicate to the community what potential values a reserve can have and how those values will flow on to the civilian sectors.
Yeah, okay. So that really feeds into the point made earlier by Rob Warding around a comprehensive but equally a nuanced communications strategy. Yeah, okay. So that's very close to 5, I think.
One thing I think we should just repeat, and it came up a little bit when we mentioned the previous CDF speaking at the 2023 conference about a one force, integrated force, is that there is still what I perceive to be a significant gap in the thinking at the senior levels of the ADF in relation to capability. Capability in nearly all cases, with maybe the exception of the space and
Cyber.
Cyber
Yep.
example given today, is it only ever looks at it in the concept of full-time numbers. There is never any analysis done of how we can break this task or this new capability into a mix of full-time and part-time people. So what goes to government is a bill for full-time people. It's never a mix. And I think the Fires Brigade in South Australia, who have to operate off Western Australia and Northern Australia, is a typical example. A lot of that could be done by part-time people on a fly-in, fly-out basis. But there's no construct given to that in the capability sense.
And I think that's exactly one of the persistent themes that Mark Armstrong identified in terms of there's never been serious work done on the cost comparative model. What the Commonwealth or the nation as a whole can reinvest in other things by investing more in the reserve component. That's what it boils down to. So that's 5. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a bit of lateral thinking on the situation that we're in as a nation. Could we look at, we're spending 30 or 40 billion a year on equipment. Defence industries and general industry. If you're going to build a tank up in somewhere or other to store fuel, it's not a defence industry really, is it? There's lots of things that are being built in infrastructure.
No.
So perhaps we could think about government favouring industries that employ a certain number of reservists. Things like that, where they are more favoured in tendering, they have to qualify for tendering and so on, so that you can actually induce industry to encourage their employees to join the reserve. Or because they're playing in the pig pen with the government and earning a lot of their income from the government, they may want to sort of be forced to, if you like, contribute to the reserve and the defence in general.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I think there are there's some thinking going on in parts of the enterprise right now along those lines. Ladies and gentlemen, can I draw things to a close at that note? Look, it's been a tremendously valuable day from my perspective anyway. And I thank all of you for participating. I thank all of the DRA National Executive Group for being here. I thank everybody that's been online throughout the day. I would just offer to you that we will take away, especially the observations and recommendations from this final session, and focus our advocacy and our efforts now in light of what we've heard today and what we've received from the group by way of guidance. We haven't yet decided on the date or the venue for the national conference next year, but I think it's fair to say, and we as in the National Executive and probably some other people, including some that might attend online, we have our annual general meeting tomorrow in this same space, starting at 9 o'clock. Just for your advice, I've just made a level 9er. We're going to start at 9 o'clock, not 10 o'clock. So if you're coming along to the AGM, be here at 9, or preferably 5 minutes before. But we will tomorrow have a look at, as part of the AGM process, look at the cohort details for next year's conference. This conference marks, I think, the end of a trilogy, if you like. The 2023 conference was, what does the Defence Strategic Review, what are the implications of that for the reserve component? Last year was, with the reserve review on foot, we talked about our submission to that review and how that was progressing. And this year we've got the outcomes, we've got the recommendations, and we've tried today to distill that into what are the particular aspects of the review's recommendations in whole or in part, that is where the DRA, as has been said by a couple of people already, where we can make the biggest contribution, where we can deliver the best effect from our slender resources as an association across the spectrum. So I think that brings to a close our 3-year journey with respect to the Defence Strategic Review and the recommendations of the Reserve Strategic Review. But that just means now that the real work begins in terms of pursuing those things that we think, with the benefit of your guidance as well, have been identified as the things that we really need to get after as a matter of urgency, with whatever power of advocacy we can marshal in terms of getting government and big defence to look at these matters as crucial for the continued viability of the reserve component and the optimum use of the reserve component for national defence. So thank you. It's been, I hope, a useful and entertaining day for you. Maybe not entertaining, but at least informative.